Hello. This is another poetry reading, this time by the extraordinary HD, of whom, if you haven't read her work, I so deeply recommend finding a collection of Hilda Doolittles and checking her out. She is an extraordinary poet. This is from the book Hermetic Definition. Many of the poems in this book don't really have titles, and so instead this comes as parts to other poems. This one is a poem titled Red Rose and a Beggar, with a time frame attributed to it, which is August 17th to September 24th, 1960. So if you were alive back then, please try to transport yourself back to 84 years ago. If you were alive back then and you're listening to this, I commend you, mostly because I feel like Substack is such a deeply, deeply niche part of the internet, and you have come 84 years through the entire development of the internet and still landed on this extremely niche platform. So good for you. I really, truly don't mean that reductively. I'm proud of you. Red Rose and a Beggar. 11. It is heart. This no salt, they say. You might go at any moment, but that might be said of any of us. So I must stand apart, keep away. An intimate of my youth, a poet wrote. So slow is the rose to open, so I contemplate these words, and the Latin dedication, and would decipher my own fate. I know the poet that I speak of wouldn't hesitate. Perhaps humility is more becoming in a woman. La rose est la fleur du creuset, and the creuset is the crucible that I called a flat dish when I wrote 3. I would enter your senses through burnt resin and pine cones. 12. But I must finish what I have begun, the tall god standing where the race is run. Did the pine cones in the flat dish light an Olympic torch? My fervor was for one not born when I wrote this. The red roses for bronze, roses were for an abstraction. Now, with like fervor, with fever, I offer them to a reality. The ecstasy comes through you, but goes on. The torch was lit from another before you, and another before that. My connection to HD arrives from one of my very first professors who actually got me interested in literature as an art and not necessarily something as a science to study. I think for those of us who don't necessarily have upbringings where people, not even to shame rural folk or people who were born significantly more poor than whatever, but when I grew up, we didn't have sit down conversations about films and beauty in films or how utterly touching a song was. My parents, the most touched by music I remember my parents being was when Martina McBride's Independence Day came out, which is a stellar patriotic song. Martina McBride is a national treasure. But I hope if you have any familiarity with early 2000s, late 90s pop country, this provides a little bit of context of where I'm coming from here. So I was introduced to HD by the passion of this professor of mine, who was the first person to kind of really connect me to an understanding that art exists, and art is something that is capable of being admired and discussed and all of those good things. I've kept in touch with him for quite a while, although admittedly, as I'm reciting this to you, there is a pinch of guilt coming over me, realizing that I haven't sent him an email in many months. And so I'll probably do this after that. HD's poetry, I think, for those who did find her, and for those who did, gain some form of grace from her, really carved a path in allowing and questioning the role of femininity in poetry. I think of people like Lorene Niedecker, I think of people like AI, who, and not artificial intelligence, like poet of the book Cruelty, AI, not. I think so many individual poets out there can credit HD for providing some form of community of acceptance and permission in writing the poetry that moves you, as opposed to the poetry that moves toward you. If you haven't checked out HD, please, I would absolutely recommend you do. Thank you for your attention. I have an email to go write. Take care.